We've already seen how to read data from a file using redirection. So that's when we would run our programs some way, and instead of taking the standard input to be the console, we use redirection through the operating system to pass in some file. That might be like indata.txt. So that's how we use redirection to read an input file. But now that we know about pointers, we can also learn about reading files from within C. So as an example, we'll take a look at this file here. So in this program, we would like to input numbers from an input file and write them rounded to 2 decimal places on a line of an output file. So I'm going to use, I'm going to put my key casting on. So I'm going to use tabs in Vim here to take a look at this input file that we're going to read. I think it's indata.txt, so I just use :tab, and then I can type my file name, and then I'm going to get a tab that shows me that input file, or the contents of any file that I open with tab. So we see here we've got some numbers without decimals, we've got numbers with lots of decimals, they're on 2 different lines. And if we look back here, our goal is to write each one on its own line and with 2 decimal places. So to start off, we need to actually create file pointers for both our input file and our output file. So just like we saw before, our syntax for creating a pointer was we have our type, and then we have the star that tells us it's a pointer to that type, and then we have our variable name. Oops. And so that rule is being followed again here. We have our type is a file, and we're saying the variable imp is a file pointer. And same with our output file pointer there. We're also initializing or declaring a double, to read in all of those items. So like 344, 55, those are going to be those items. And then as we'll see, we read from files much the same way that we read from standard in. And so we can get our input status back to know for how long should we read this file. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually assign something to these pointers, right? So the syntax for that is we're just going to assign our file pointer imp to what is returned by the function fopen, and we pass in the name of our input file. We can see above that's indata.txt. So we pass that as a string. And we also pass as a second parameter to this function another string that indicates whether we want to read or write from this file. And so if we want to read, we pass an R, and we can see that for our output, let's call it out.txt, we're going to use a W for write. And now that we've got these file pointers, we can see that the syntax for reading and writing for a file, like I said, is very similar to the syntax for reading and writing from standard in. So if I want to just read the first double that I encounter in my file, I just use fscanf. So you can see it's just like scanf, except it's got an F in front because it's coming from a file. And now I need to pass in my file pointer. So this is imp. And then I need to pass in a format string. And so I want to read a double. So remember the placeholder when we are reading in a double is LF. And then finally, I need to pass in a pointer to where I want to store the result. And we have already defined item for storing what we read from the file. And so this would work, or at least I always am messing up the ampersand and the percent sign. So this should have been address of. And so I guess I'll say fscanf syntax. We have inputs are file pointer, so that's imp string, and then we also have pointer to var to store what is read. So this would work as we see it, but just like scanf, if I want to know whether I successfully read anything, I can also get back an integer, and that tells me how many items are successfully read. And so that's what our input status variable is doing for us. So input status should be, if there was a double there available to us, input status should be 1. If there was no double, then it's going to be -1. But what we can do is, just like when we were designing while loops that could take an unknown number of inputs from the user, we can say something like while input status is exactly equal to 1. So as long as we're reading one double, we should do something. Well, we should write whatever is an item, right? And then we should also get the next double. And so either get the next double item, right? So either that's successfully going to get another double for us, or it's going to change input status to -1 and we won't actually go to the next loop. So in order to write the item to the file, we use fprintf. So again, very similar to printf, but it's just got an F in front. And our syntax, we need to pass in our file pointer. So in this case, that's going to be out p. And then we need to pass in our format string. So that's going to be, we can say LF, but we said we want it to be only 2 decimal point places, and we want to write each one on a new line. And finally, we need to pass in, so this is a great illustration of the difference between address of and the value, right? So if I put ampersand item here, that would say the address of item. But we don't want to print the address, we want to print what's actually in item. And now we need to get the next double, so I can actually just copy this, paste it down here, and we should be good to go. And we can also close the file here. I believe that's just fclose, and we need to pass in the pointers. So we have in p, and we also have fclose of out p. And this should work for us. So let's compile it and see. File example. Okay, no compiler errors, that's always good. And so it ran, we didn't put any printf statements, all of our printing was to the file. So let's see, we did create out.txt, and it looks like we wrote all of our numbers with 2 decimal places. So that looks like we were successful. So let's just take a last look at file example.c to review what we saw. So we saw that we can use fprintf and fscanf basically exactly the same way as we used printf and scanf before. We just first need to declare our file pointers, and we need to assign them to point to the correct thing to indicate our input and output files. So that is how you read a file, and that should get you through the file reading that we need to do for the upcoming labs and programs.